So we'll go ahead and get started. Want to give you an update on Danny Price. First, he was doing pretty good. We thought he was going to come home early. Kathy said now it looks like it's going to be hopefully Friday. He's had some problems with NASH, which is a liver issue, and ammonia levels, and some things like that. But they seem to be getting everything taken care of. She's had her training and all those kind of things. So hopefully Friday she will get to come home, or he will get to come home. And we really appreciate those that have volunteered to help out in the office during this time. So let's go ahead and pray. Father, we just thank you for this beautiful day we have, for the sunshine, the cool breeze, Lord, and just your presence among us. We thank you that you're here for Kathy and Danny and just all the rest, Lord. And Lord, we just pray for all those that are hurting at this time, those that are on our prayer list, those that are on our hearts, those that are all around us, Lord. And we just ask that you be with all of them. And we just ask you to be with us tonight as we gather here in fellowship and friendship with one another, Lord, and just help us to be blessed by this gathering. And all these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, this is the 6th of July. The 4th of July was just, of course, a couple days ago. If you know math, that's 6 minus 2. But I'll tell you what, we were with my brother down in Vincennes, or we were actually eating with him while we were down there. And he preaches at a General Baptist church, and one of his pet peeves is people saying the 4th of July. They're celebrating the 4th of July. He said, we're not celebrating 4th of July, we're celebrating Independence Day. He said, we don't celebrate the 25th of December. He said, we celebrate Christmas. And for him, he did a whole, believe it or not, on the 3rd of July, he did a whole sermon on it. And why and part of that was why we should remember that it's Independence Day and not just the 3rd of July. So, it kind of makes sense, but we're going to talk a little bit about some of those kind of things. Not so much Independence Day, but one of the things that goes around a lot right now is a lot of stories about the Founding Fathers that, they weren't religious people. Or the big thing going around now is that they were deists. Now, what a deist is, that's defined as someone who believes that there's a God out there somewhere, that God set everything up, put it into motion, and just left it alone. Lets everything run on its own. Everything's by chance. It's kind of the epitome of the whole idea of free will. That everybody's got free will. That God is not concerned about anything. He just kind of sits back and doing whatever. And now there's another part of that actually called the alarm clock believers, because what they believe is that God puts it all in motion. He's kind of set this alarm clock, and when the things with Christ's return, there's going to be kind of the alarm go off. God will come back, get involved again, like he is in the book of Revelation with the return of Christ and all that. So, most of us don't believe that. We believe that God is involved every day and everything. And, there are some things that God does let happen. Some of those are because of his plan. Some of it are because of our decisions. And what I mean by that is, you ever had a kid or somebody you knew, or maybe a brother or sister or someone, a fellow employee that, you've told them a couple times and they just gotta go learn it for yourself. My dad used to say there's three. My dad always said 3 like this, so you wouldn't get confused. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So you didn't get 3 confused with 2 or 4. But anyway, 3 things he used to say about learning. He said when it comes to boys learning, he said there are those who learn by watching, there are those who learn by being told, and then there are those boys that just got to pee on the electric fence for themselves. And kind of that's the way sometimes, that's the way some people are, and sometimes God even has to do that with us. But most of our founding fathers were religious people. They were not just deists. There are some that were pretty close, probably Thomas Jefferson the most, but Thomas Jefferson was also a man of faith, and he got a lot of criticism for the Jefferson Bible. If you've ever heard about that, he actually took the Bible and edited out anything that had to do with miracles and a lot of stuff like that, and basically it didn't end up being very big by the time he was done with it. But even Thomas Jefferson, he was not opposed to Christianity. What he was opposed to was some of the corruption within the church. And actually he said, to the corruption of Christianity I am indeed opposed, but not to the genuine precepts of Jesus himself. I am a Christian in the only sense in which I believe Jesus wished anyone to be, sincerely attached to his doctrines in preference to all others. And so, he says, I am a Christian in the sense that I follow Jesus' doctrine. Now, it is kind of questionable at times, according to some of his writings, if he truly believed in the divinity of Christ, or just Christ as a great teacher. But he did his best to emulate Christ, and even to the point that when Thomas Jefferson was elected president of the country, one of the things that he found when he arrived in Washington, D.C. is there were so few churches there and you got to remember, Washington was a new town. Washington didn't exist until it was put into existence by the Congress. And so they moved the capital there. Thomas Jefferson gets into town. There were almost no churches. So Thomas Jefferson decreed that church would be held every Sunday in the chamber of the House, what we call the House of Representatives, and that's where they had church. And that went on for decades and decades, and sometimes even Thomas Jefferson would speak. Didn't happen very often, but so Thomas Jefferson, through almost his whole administration, he was there every Sunday. As a matter of fact, he and what today we would call his chief of staff, they had a different name for it back then, they were such regular attenders that they didn't put reserved on his seat. This is one of those things how people don't change, whether it's 200 years ago or today. Thomas Jefferson had his seat, and so everybody knew that's Thomas Jefferson's seat. So nobody sat in the seat that Thomas Jefferson or some of his chief of staff or some of his other staff would sit in. They always left those seats open, and that's the way it is in church day. So if you think people in church day are the only ones that have their seat, no, that goes at least back as far as Thomas Jefferson sitting in the House of Representatives, watching church or having church every Sunday, and so and it was. And they said it was by the courtesy of the congregation. Just nobody did it. I will tell you a funny story though about having your seats in church. A friend of mine was a pastor of a church down by Clinton, and somebody come in and told him as he's getting ready to go out, and he kind of comes out of a back room to go down the aisle when they light the candles and all that kind of stuff, and they come back and they told him, they said, hey, there's a visitor in church this morning, and she kind of looks familiar, but we're not really sure who she is, but we think she might have been here before. And he said, okay, well, that's good. They said, well, she sat in Mr. So-and-so's seat, and when Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so came in and saw her in their seat, they told her that was their seat and she needed to move. And so he's thinking, oh man, but then it got worse, because as he come out and turned down the aisle and happened to look down there, it was the district superintendent, Paula Mayberry, that was sitting there. Of course, Paula had a good heart, and she thought it was funny. It about turned him inside and out. But so, Thomas Jefferson was a man of Christian ideals, if nothing else. Now, John Adams, who was basically raised almost as a minister's kid, stayed true to his faith, and he was very set in his ways and very much, matter of fact, he was the one that was kind of the stick in the mud and all that kind of thing. But he said, I had to write down some of these quotes because I can't remember them all. Without religion, this world would be something not fit to be mentioned in polite society. And he said, our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people, and it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So even Adams is saying that the Constitution was meant for religious people. The whole idea of setting this country up was for that freedom of religion, and religious people being there trying to worship the way they see fit. And last week we talked about freedom of religion and what that means. And so one of the other main ones that people talk about, because he could be kind of a scoundrel at times and at different times in his life, but that was Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin actually became a Quaker, went to a Quaker church. It was the Quakers that changed his views on slavery and made him an abolitionist. But he believed in a God. Now, they all said, well, he was more into science and being a Renaissance man. The Revolutionary War was kind of getting towards the end of the Renaissance and all that, which was about what you know, not who you know. It was about knowledge and intelligence and learning and all those sort of things. But he said, this was Franklin's words that he wrote to a friend of his named Stiles. He said, here is my creed. I believe in one God, creator of the universe. He governs it by his providence, that he ought to be worshipped, that the most acceptable service we render to him is doing good to his other children, that the soul of man is immortal and will be treated with justice in another life, respecting its conduct in this. As for Jesus of Nazareth, I think the system of morals and religion, as he left them to us, is the best the world has ever saw, but I have some doubts to his divinity, though it's a question I do not dogmatism on. In other words, he said, I'm not getting all tied up in doctrine and all that sort of thing. Haven't ever studied it, and I think it's needless to busy myself with it now, where I expect soon an opportunity of knowing the truth with less trouble. So, he didn't believe in life after death. He believed in a judgment day and all those things. And during the Constitutional Convention, when they were actually putting the Constitution together, and the people were gathered there in Philadelphia, he addressed them when they were talking about some of those things. And he said, I have lived, sir, addressing, I think it was Adams, it was the president, or John Hancock, the president of the Constitutional Convention. I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men, and if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, it is probable that an empire can rise. Is it probable an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings that except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain to build it. I firmly believe this, and also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. So here, Franklin is making a speech at the Constitutional Convention and saying, if we don't have God involved in this, then we're not going to have any more success than the Tower of Babel, of course, as we know, and that God shut that all down, sent everybody on their way. That's when he changed the languages of everybody from having one language to having many, and that, so, Benjamin Franklin is saying we got to have God involved in this. And actually, when they were trying to decide between whether it was going to be a Senate or a House, because that was the debate in the beginning. The small states were saying we need a Senate, equal representation with the big states. And the big states were saying, no, we need to have it by population. And they pretty well settled on a population thing with the House of Representatives, and they're debating about what to do and how to go forward to try. And they can't get a compromise because the smaller states are saying, no, we can't do that. We'll never have a say-so in anything. And Franklin stopped them all and said, gentlemen, the problem here is that we have not prayed. And they prayed for the rest of the day concerning that. When the prayer was done, guess what came out of it? The U.S. Senate. Now, some of you may debate whether that was really divine intervention or something else, but the whole point that not only did Franklin call for prayer to settle this issue and looking for divine guidance, what they called it back then, and he mentioned it is providence, and that is God acting in the affairs of people. So he said, we got to seek it. We got to understand it. They all prayed. There were times that the Constitutional Convention marched as one all the way down and went to church. And that was the Continental Congress that would do that on days that they needed to pray and fast because the war wasn't going well and all those things. So there's all kinds of records about that. And so then we kind of get to George Washington. George Washington was a very spiritual man all the way from his youth. And one time for his dad to try to show him what was going on, they had a garden. His dad had a garden, and he had young George, I think he was like 7, to grow a garden alongside of it. And they tilled all the ground, and they were getting ready, and his dad went out unbeknownst to George with lettuce, and y'all know lettuce pops up pretty quick. And in the dirt, he took the seeds, and he spelled out George. So when that started to grow, he brought George out, and they looked at it, and he said, where'd that come from? And his father said, do you think somebody did that? And of course, the answer was yes. And he said, so what else do you think is happening around here that you can't see that is going on? And he taught him about God designing the universe, making things grow, and all that from that little example of his garden. And George Washington pledged his whole life to that. You know that, and I've told you this before, I think it was on around his birthday or whatever, but you know the picture of George Washington kneeling in front of his horse with the horse behind him in the snow, and he's knelt down to pray. That's a factual occurrence. Now, if it was like the painting, I don't know, but they have records of several soldiers who saw him. Things weren't going well again. It was the winter of Valley Forge. People are freezing. George's looking for guidance. He doesn't know what to do. So he gets on his horse and rides all the way across the field to the other side because he didn't want anybody else to hear his prayer. Knelt down, prayed, and came back. And also, if you read about George Washington, he attributed many of the, I started to say victories. They weren't all victories, but he saw the hand of God in the whole Revolutionary War, and not by saying that God is leading the war. What he saw was like they were trapped on Long Island, and the British were closing in on them. This is at the very beginning of the war, the Battle of New York, and they're about to be wiped out. The war is going to be over in just a matter of weeks because they're going to wipe out the army. They're going to capture George Washington. They decided to bring all these boats in at night and get out. They set up a bunch of campfires, make it look like the camps were still going. They had guys that all they did was fed those fires to keep them going because the British are on the other side of the water, and they can see the fires, and they start getting everybody out. Well, it comes dawn, and they've still got about 25-30% of the guys to get out. And George Washington is concerned that once the British see that's going on, they don't have a chance. The ships will start bombing them, the boats, and these are, the big kind of rowboats like you see them crossing the Delaware in. And they're trying to get out, and he thinks it's all over, has a prayer. And you know what happened? Historical fact, and George Washington attributed it to providence. He never called God anything else but providence, divine providence. A fog came in. A really heavy, dense fog covered up the whole escape of the Revolutionary Army to get to the other side. And down there, the water kind of comes down, splits, and Long Island's in the middle. The British were on this side. He needed to get to that side. They all escaped without a casualty after dawn because of the fog. And I could tell you story after story about George Washington and all that. And but he saw God's intervention in his own life, in the country he was fighting to free, and even in this whole idea, this ill-equipped army that overcame the largest, best army, most well-trained army in the world. And he actually wrote to General Thomas Nelson in 1778, the hand of providence, that's God. God has been so conspicuous in all this that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith and more than wicked that does not have gratitude enough to acknowledge his obligation. So he said, you either got to be super wicked or you got to be an infidel that has no faith at all not to see God in all these things. And so, but it wasn't just them. Oh, by the way, I told you that Thomas Jefferson walked to church every morning, he and his staff. Well, John Adams followed him. John Adams carried on the tradition of going to church every Sunday morning, except where Jefferson walked, John Adams had a big fancy horse carriage that pulled him in style to go. But there were others. It wasn't just these four. I just wanted to pick out, that's kind of the big four names that everybody thinks about. And James Madison, who was another one. But 29 of the signers went to schools, colleges, whose primary purpose was the training of ministers. You know what we call those today? Seminaries. Yale, Harvard, all those schools started off as seminaries. And 29 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence went to seminaries, including Jefferson and Adams and a bunch of others. But there were other guys as well. Francis Hopkinson was the musical director, the choir director at his church. He wrote a hymn book. This guy, believe it or not, he loved the book of Psalms. And he said, unfortunately, we have the words, we don't have the music. He wrote music to all 150 Psalms. And they said the book was 3 inches thick. And if you know about Psalm 119, it's several pages long in the Bible. They said it took 30 minutes to sing it. I can't imagine. If we did that one time, that'd probably be the end of the praise team. So, and I'd say I don't know anything about it. But he did that. He wrote other hymns and things. Roger Sherman was a man who was part of a new denomination that was being formed. He wrote the doctrinal creed for his new denomination. Now, is that a man of faith or is that not? Benjamin Rush, whether you ever heard him or not, last Sunday we were practicing something that he started. Benjamin Rush started holding Sunday schools in this country. He was the first one to do Sunday school and founded the country's first Bible Society. And then James Wilson, who was a trained clergyman in Scotland, but became an attorney, came over here, and what he did was he taught law and taught what the biblical basis for all laws are. And a lot of it goes back to 10 Commandments. A lot of it comes out of the other rules of the books of Moses, first 5 books of the Bible, and all those. So when people tell you that we weren't founded by men of faith, when they tell you that the founding fathers weren't real believers, when they tell you all those things, I want you to know the truth. And this stuff, when you actually look for it, you'll find all the stuff about the deist and all those things up front, but it's harder to find these things. And if anybody's ever interested, I'll be glad to point you where to find them. But one of the best books out there ever to read is Being, B-E-I-N-G, Being George Washington, because it's all about his faith, the things that he saw. And then the whole point of the end of the book is, you can be a George Washington in your life. You may not lead a country, but you might lead your Sunday school class. You may lead the other organizations that you're in. Maybe the PTO at school or any of those kind of things. But there's a lot of things out there that tell us what these things are and documents that you can look up and see. And so anyway, as we go through this Independence Week, and we think about Independence Day, as my brother would say, we need to think about the guys that gave it. Now, one thing I want to also say that, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, those guys pledged their lives, their fortunes, and most of them lost one or both. Most all of them ended up broke. Some of them ended up in jail. Some of them ended up dead, and all those things. So, that's quite a bit when they offer all those things up and do it in faith and knowing that there's something better and a better cause. So hope you learned something. Hope you understand a little bit more about this great country we live in, so that from now on, you can always, and we can all always celebrate Independence Day every year on July the 4th. So hope you had a good time. Now we got good internet. I can do these back at the house again, and I'll enjoy sitting outside here with you. So just like we always say, go out. May the Lord bless you, keep you. May He watch over you. And wherever you go, may His blessings be upon you, and may you be a blessing to all that you encounter. We'll catch you next week. See ya.